Thus, in far less time than I have taken to tell it, we found ourselves masters of the brig. The only person of our opponents who was left alive was Richard Parker. This man, it will be remembered, I had knocked down with a blow from the pump handle at the commencement of the attack. He now lay motionless by the door of the shattered stateroom, but upon Peter's touching him with his foot, he spoke and entreated for mercy. His head was only slightly cut, and otherwise he had received no injury. He had been merely stunned by the blow. He now got up and, for the present, secured his hands behind his back. The dog was still growling over Jones, but upon examination we found him completely dead. The blood issuing in a stream from a deep wound in his throat, inflicted no doubt by the sharp teeth of the animal. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and the wind was still blowing tremendously. The brig evidently labored much more than usual, and it became absolutely necessary that something should be done with the view of easing her some measure. At almost every roll to leeward, we ship for a sea, several of which came partially down into the cabin during our scuffle. The hatchway having been left open by myself when I had descended. The entire range of bulwarks to larboard had been swept away, as well as the caboose, together with the jolly boat from this counter. The creaking and working of the mainmast, too, gave indication that it was nearly sprung. To make room for this more stowage in the afterhold, the heel of this mast had been stepped between decks. A very reprehensible practice, occasionally resorted to by ignorant shipbuilders, so that it was imminent danger of working from its step. But to crown all other difficulties, we plumbed the well, and we found no less than 7 feet of water. Leaving the bodies of the crew alive in the cabin, we got to work immediately at the pumps. Parker, of course, being set at liberty to assist us in the labor. Augustus' arm was now bound up as well as could be affected, and he did what he could, but that was not much. However, we found that we could just manage to keep the leak from gaining upon us by having one pump constantly going. As there were only 4 of us, this was severe labor, but we endeavored to keep our spirits and look anxiously for daybreak, when we hoped to lighten the brig by cutting away the mainmast. In this matter, we passed a night of terrible anxiety and fatigue, and when the day at length broke, the gale had neither abated in the least, nor were there any signs of its abating. We now dragged the bodies on deck and threw them overboard. Our next care was to get rid of the mainmast. The necessary preparations having been made, Peters cut away the mast, having found axes in the cabin, while the rest of us stood by the stays and lanyards. As the brig gave a tremendous lee lurch, the word was given to cut away the weather lanyards, which being done, the whole mass of wood and rigging plunged into the sea, clear of the brig, without doing any material injury. We now found that the vessel did not quite labor as much as before, but our situation was still exceedingly precarious, and in spite of the utmost exertions, we could not gain upon the leak without the aid of both pumps. The little assistance which Augustus could render us was not really of any importance. To add to our distress, a heavy sea, striking the brig to the windward, threw her off several points from the wind, and before she could regain her position, another broke completely over her and hurled her first full upon the beam ends. The ballast now shifted in a mass to the leeward, the stowage having been knocking about perfectly at random for some time. And for a few moments we thought of nothing could save us from capsizing, but presently, however, we partially righted, but the ballast still retained its place to larboard. We lay so much along that it was useless to think of working the pumps, which indeed we couldn't have done much longer. We could not have done much longer in any case, as our hands were entirely raw, and with the exception of labor we had undergone, we were bleeding in the most horrible manner. Contrary to Parker's advice, we now proceeded to cut away the foremast, and at length accomplished it after much difficulty. Owing to the position in which we lay, and going overboard, the wreck took with it the bowsprit, and left us a complete hulk. So far as we had reason to rejoice in the escape of our longboat, which had received no damage from any of the huge seas which had come on board. But we had not long to congratulate ourselves, for the mast having gone, and of course the foresail with it, by which the brig had been steadied, every sea now made a complete breach over us, and in 5 minutes our deck was swept from stem to stern. The longboat and the starboard bulwarks torn off, and even the windlass shattered into fragments. It was indeed hardly possible for us to be in more pitiable condition. At noon there seemed to be some slight appearance of the gales abating, but in this we were sadly disappointed, for it only lulled a few minutes to blow with redoubled fury. About 4 in the afternoon it was utterly impossible to stand up against the violence of the blast, and as the night closed in upon us, I had not a shadow of hope that the vessel would hold together until morning. By midnight we had settled very deep in the water, which was now up to the orlop deck. The rudder went soon afterward, the sea which tore it away, lifting the after portion of the brig entirely from the water, against which she thumped in her descent, with such a concussion as would be occasioned by going ashore. We'd all calculated that the rudder would hold its own to the last, and as it was unusually strong, being rigged as I had never seen one rigged either before or since, down its main timber there ran a succession of stout iron hooks. And others in the same manner down the stern post. Through these hooks there extended a very thick wrought iron rod, the rudder being thus held to the stern post and swinging freely on the rod. The tremendous force of the sea which tore it off may be estimated by the fact that the hooks in the stern post, which ran entirely through it, being clinched on the side, were drawn, every one of them, completely out of the solid wood. We had scarcely time to draw breath after the violence of this shock, when one of the most tremendous waves I had ever known broke right on board of us, sweeping the companionway clear off, bursting in the hatchways, and filling every inch of the vessel with water. Luckily, just before night, all the 4 of us had lashed ourselves firmly to the fragments of the windlass, lying in this manner as flat as upon the deck as possible. This precaution alone saved us from destruction. As it was, we were all more or less stunned by the immense weight of water which tumbled upon us, and which did not roll from above us until we were nearly exhausted. As soon as I could recover breath, I called aloud to my companions. Augustus alone replied, saying, "It is all over with us, and may God have mercy upon our souls." And by the by, both the others were unable to speak, when they exhorted us to take courage, as there was still hope, it being impossible from the nature of the cargo, as the brig could go down, and there being every chance that the gale would blow over us by the morning. These words inspired me with new life. For strange as it may seem, although there was an It was obvious that the vessel with a cargo of empty oil casks would not sink. I had hitherto been so confused in mind as to have overlooked this consideration altogether. And the danger with which I had for some time regarded as most imminent was that of foundering. As hope revived within me, I made use of every opportunity to strengthen the lashings which held me to the remains of the windlass. And in this occupation I soon discovered that my companions were also busy. The night was as dark as it could possibly be, and the horrible shrieking din and the confusion which surrounded us, it is useless to attempt describing. Our deck lay level with the sea, or rather, we were encircled with a towering ridge of foam, a portion of which swept over us every instant. It is not too much to say that our heads were not fairly out of water more than 1 second in 3. Although we lay close together, no one of us could see the other, or indeed any portion of the brig itself, upon which we were so tempestuously hurled about. At intervals we called one to the other, thus endeavoring to keep alive hope, and render consolation and encouragement to such of us as stood most in need of it. The feeble condition of Augustus made him an object of solicitude with all of us. And as from the lacerated condition of his right arm, it must have been impossible for him to secure his lashings without any degree of firmness. We were in momentary expectation of finding that he had gone overboard. Yet to render him aid was a thing altogether out of the question. Fortunately, his station was more secure than that of any rest of us, for the upper part of his body lying just beneath a portion of the shattered windlass. The seas, as they tumbled in upon him, were greatly broken in their violence. In any other situation than in this, into which he had been accidentally thrown after having been lashing himself in a very exposed spot, he must have inevitably have perished before morning. Owing to the brig's lying so much along, we were less liable to be washed off than otherwise had been the case. The heel, as I have before said, was to larboard, about 1/2 of the deck being constantly under water. The seas, therefore, which struck us to starboard were much broken by the vessel's side, only when reaching us in fragments as we lay flat on the faces, while those which came from larboard, being what are called backwater seas, and obtaining little hold upon us on account of our posture, had not sufficient force to drag us from our fastenings. In this frightful situation we lay until the day broke, so as to show us more fully the horrors which surrounded us. The brig was a mere log, rolling about at the mercy of every wave. The gale was upon the increase, if anything, blowing indeed a complete hurricane, and there appeared to us no earthly prospect of deliverance. For several hours we held on in silence, expecting every moment that our lashes would either give way, if the remains of the windlass would go by the board, or some of the huge seas which roared in every direction would around us and above us would drive the hulk so far beneath the water that we should be drowned before it could regain the surface. By the mercy of God, however, we were preserved from these imminent dangers, and about midday we were cheered by the light of the blessed sun. Shortly afterward, we could perceive a slight diminution of the force of the wind when now, for the first time since the latter part of the evening before, Augustus spoke, passing Peter who lay close to him. if he thought there was any possibility of our being saved. As no reply was first made to this question, we all concluded that the hybrid and the drowned where he lay, but presently, to our great joy, he spoke, although very feebly, saying that he was in great pain, being so cut by the tightness of his lashes across the stomach, that he must either find means of loosening them or perish, as it was impossible that he could endure his misery much longer.